Alrighty, alrighty. Welcome back to Mecha Mondays. I'm your intrepid narrator, pilot Fraggeth, and today, well, this is what we're doing. We're doing Starship Troopers. Uh, I was having second thoughts all the way out till about 5 minutes ago. Um, and, because I don't want to start nothing. And people get real worked up over the book, and I'm like, I don't think it's worth getting that worked up for, to be honest. It's not that Uh, I'm not saying it's not that divisive. I get it, but it's like, come on, man. Just it's a freaking book, man. Calm down. Not to get so worked up over. As will become clear, I think people have a number of jaded views about the book, and I think a bunch of them are deserved. Not all of them are. I think everybody in their own little way who's read it has a certain degree of either rose or whatever the opposite tinted goggles are about it. Um, I just ask you to keep an open mind and remember the MST3K mantra. Just repeat to yourself it's just a fictional work of fiction. And you should really just relax. Um, so my copy I have to keep saved in it's an old copy. It's not a first ed by any, it's not a first edition by any means. But it's somewhat fragile. So I have to be a little careful with it. Alrighty. Tentatively, we will call that our stopping point for today. I'm talking about where I'm looking page-wise. Just bear with me a moment here. I had a spare. I have so many bookmarks. I am losing them. Where do they go? Where do they come from? Well, some of them happen to be little snippets from the newspaper of the Phantom. And the reason for that is simple. Some of those are baffling. I mean, I don't tune in to check out what's going on in the world of the Phantom all that often. So when I do, it's uh, it's pretty Kafkaesque. I'm just like, what is this man doing? What's going on today? And they're tiny, and they fit very handily into the pages of the book. I am not going to be able to use that. That is too large. I can, however, use whatever this is. Cool. Okay. So, Starship Troopers. What can I say about Starship Troopers that hasn't been said by other people? Um, Not much, other than reading it aloud. I'm pretty sure there are a couple current and well done audiobooks of this, probably on Audible. I didn't exactly check, but I saw one or two that showed up when I was looking for cover art. Um, the cover art you see here, which I got some unreasonably large resolution that I'm very happy with, is the same as my edition that I'm holding in front of me. So I've got a couple. There are boatloads of cover art for this book. It's been reprinted a few times, one might say. So I guess I'll go with the basics. And read the back of the cover, the back cover, which says, "Hand rocket launchers have replaced rifles. Armored suits are the uniform, and they are jet equipped. Starships feed the distant battlefronts, but men still die, and the dying hasn't changed." Starship Troopers is the tough and thought-provoking story of a typical infantryman in the 70th century, from boot camp, where he learns the meaning of authority, to combat, where he tastes the price of freedom. Uh, so, what that doesn't tell you is that there are long stretches of philosophical diatribe here. You can call them diatribes. Some people are like, oh, this is all his manifesto. And I'm like, sure, so what if it is? It's just a book. You can take it seriously if you want, or you can think, hey, guess what? It's a fictional setting. People are thinking thoughts that are relevant to this fictional setting, and this is how the fictional world is put together. So, calm down. And if y'all are going to take it to the comments, please be nice to each other. That's all I ask. I don't want to get into any fights. People seem to do that over this for some reason. Of course, I was worried about that with Helicopter Story, and that never manifested, which is good, because that's another one where it's like, I think there is a relevant message to be heard here, if only to understand someone's views and worldview. But at the same time, people tend to get real upset about it for some reason, and I don't think that's necessary. Of course, part of that was reading how people eat their own, and it's dangerous to get caught in your own little echo chambers. So that was kind of part of the thing going on there. Okay, so I've got a tentative stopping point for today, and I've managed to say absolutely nothing, because I think the book will mostly do that on its own merits. And yeah, okay. Hopefully this will be a more coherent Monday than most, but based on how we've started, that is probably a foregone conclusion. Sometimes I have difficulty with Heinlein's rhythm. It takes a bit of doing, but since I've prepped myself with a couple of weeks already of Heinlein shorter stories, this hopefully will go well. Thank you to everyone tuning in. Hi. And yeah, that would be Optical Antenna and Derby Shark. Welcome. Welcome back. All right, let's get cracking on Starship Troopers by Robert A. Heinlein. Starship Troopers by Robert A. Heinlein. First published in 1959. Chapter 1. Come on, you apes! You want to live forever? Unknown Platoon Sergeant, 1918. I always get the shakes before a drop. I've had the injections, of course, and the hypnotic preparation, and it stands to reason I can't really be afraid. The ship's psychiatrist has checked my brainwaves and asked me silly questions while I was asleep, and he tells me that it isn't fear, it isn't anything important. It's just like the trembling of an eager racehorse in the starting gate. I couldn't say about that. I've never been a racehorse. But the fact is, I'm scared silly every time. At D-30, after we had mustered in the drop room of the Roger Young, our platoon leader inspected us. He wasn't our regular platoon leader because Lieutenant Rajak, of course, I told myself I wouldn't have this problem, Rajak, had bought it on our last drop. He really, let's take the paragraph from the top. It's already gone off course. At D-30, after we had mustered in the drop room of the Roger Young, our platoon leader inspected us. He wasn't our regular platoon leader, because Lieutenant Rajak had bought it in our last drop. He was really the platoon sergeant, career ship Sergeant Jalal. Jelly was a Finno-Turk from Iskander, around Proxima. A swarthy little man who looked like a clerk, but I've seen him tackle two berserk privates so big he had to reach up to grab them, crack their heads together like coconuts, step back out of the way while they fell. Off duty he wasn't bad, for a sergeant. You could even call him Jelly to his face. Not recruits, of course, but anybody who had made at least one combat drop. But right now he was on duty. We had all each inspected our combat equipment. Look, it's your own neck, see? The acting platoon sergeant had gone over us carefully after he mustered us, and now Jelly went over us again, his face mean, his eyes missin' nothing. He stopped by the man in front of me, pressed the button on his belt that gave readings on his physicals. "Fallout?" "But, Sarge, it's just a cold. The surgeon said—" Jelly interrupted. "But, Sarge," he snapped, "the surgeon ain't making no drop, and neither are you, with a degree and a half of fever. You think I got time to chat with you just before a drop? Fall out!" Jenkins left us, looking sad and mad, and I felt bad, too. Because of the lieutenant buying it, last drop, and people moving up, I was assistant section leader, second section, this drop, and now I was going to have a hole in my section and no way to fill it. That's not good. It means a man can run into something sticky, call for help, and have nobody to help him. Jelly didn't downcheck anybody else. Presently, he stepped out in front of us, looked us over, and shook his head sadly. "What a gang of apes!" he growled. "Maybe if you'd all buy it this drop, they could start over and build the kind of outfit the lieutenant expected you to be. But probably not, with the sort of recruits we get these days." He suddenly straightened up, shouted, "I just want to remind you apes that each and every one of you has cost the government. Counting weapons, armor, ammo, instrumentation, and training, everything, including the way you overeat, has cost, on the hoof, better'n $500,000. Add in the 30 cents you are actually worth, and that runs to quite a sum." He glared at us. "So bring it back. We can spare you, but we can't spare that fancy suit you're wearing. I don't want any heroes in this outfit. The lieutenant wouldn't like it. You got a job to do, you go down, you do it, you keep your ears open for recall, you show up for retrieval on the bounce and by the numbers. Get me?" He glared again. "You're supposed to know the plan, but some of you ain't got any minds to hypnotize, so I'll sketch it out. You'll be dropped in 2 skirmish lines, calculated 2,000-yard intervals. Get your bearing on me as soon as you hit. Get your bearing and distance on your squad mates, both sides, while you take cover. You've wasted 10 seconds already, so you smash and destroy whatever's at hand until the flankers hit dirt." He was talking about me. As assistant section leader, I was going to be left flanker, with nobody at my elbow. I began to tremble. "Once they hit, straighten out those lines. Equalize those intervals. Drop what you're doing and do it. 12 seconds. Then advance by leapfrog, odd and even, assistant section leaders minding the count and guiding the envelopment." He looked at me. "If you've done this properly, which I doubt, the flanks will make contact as recall sounds, at which time home you go. Any questions?" There weren't any. There never were. He went on. "One more word. This is just a raid, not a battle. It's a demonstration of firepower and frightfulness. Our mission is to let the enemy know that we could have destroyed their city, but didn't. But that they aren't safe even though we refrain from total bombing. You'll take no prisoners. You'll kill only when you can't help it. But the entire area we hit is to be smashed. I don't want to see any of you loafers back aboard here with unexpended bombs. Get me?" He glanced at the time. "Rashak's roughnecks have got a reputation to uphold. Lieutenant told me before he bought it to tell you that he will always have his eye on you every minute, and that he expects your names to shine." Jelly glanced over at Sergeant Miglaccio. Jelly glanced over at Sergeant Miglaccio, first section leader. 5 minutes for the Padre," he stated. Some of the boys dropped out of ranks, went over and knelt in front of Miglaccio, and not necessarily those of his creed either. Moslems, Christians, Gnostics, Jews, whoever wanted a word with him before a drop, he was there. I've heard tell that there used to be military outfits whose chaplains did not fight alongside the others, but I've never been able to see how that could work. I mean, how can a chaplain bless anything he's not willing to do himself? In any case, in the mobile infantry, everybody drops and everybody fights. Chaplain and cook and the old man's writer. Once we went down the tube, there wouldn't be a roughneck left aboard. Except Jenkins, of course, and that's not his fault. I didn't go over. I was always afraid somebody would see me shake if I did, and anyhow, the Padre could bless me just as handily from where he was. But he came over to me as the last stragglers stood up and pressed his helmet against mine to speak privately. "Johnny," he said quietly, "this is your first drop as a non-com." Yeah, I wasn't really a non-com any more than Jelly was really an officer. "Just this, Johnny. Don't buy the farm. You know your job. Do it. Just do it. Don't try to win a medal." Thanks, Padre. I shan't." He added something gently in a language I don't know, patted me on the shoulder, and hurried back to his section. Jelly called out, "'Tention!" and we all snapped to. "Platoon! Section!" Miglaccio and Johnson echoed. "By sections, port and starboard, prepare for drop. Section! Man your capsules! Move! Squad!" I had to wait while squads 4 and 5 manned their capsules and moved on down the firing tube before my capsule showed up on the port track and I could climb into it. I wondered if those old-timers got the shakes as they climbed into the Trojan horse. Or was it just me? Jelly checked each man as he was sealed in, and he sealed me in himself. As he did so, he leaned toward me and said, "Don't goof off, Johnny. This is just like a drill." The top closed on me, and I was alone. "Just like a drill," he says. I began to shake uncontrollably. Then, in my earphones, I heard Jelly from the center line tube. "Bridge! Rishak's Roughnecks! Ready for drop!" 17 seconds, Lieutenant," I heard the ship captain's cheerful contralto replying, and resented her calling Jelly Lieutenant. To be sure, our lieutenant was dead, and maybe Jelly would get his commission, but we were still Rashak's Roughnecks. She added, "Good luck, boys." "Thanks, Captain." "Brace yourselves. 5 seconds." I was strapped all over, belly, forehead, shins, but I shook worse than ever. It's better after you unload. Until you do, you sit there in total darkness, wrapped like a mummy against the accelerations, barely able to breathe, and knowing that there is just nitrogen around you, in the capsule, even if you could get your helmet open, which you can't, and knowing that the capsule is surrounded by the firing tube anyhow, and if the ship gets hit before they fire you, you haven't got a prayer. You'll just die there, unable to move, helpless. It's that endless wait in the dark that causes the shakes, thinking that they've forgotten you. The ship has been hulled and stayed in orbit. The ship has been hulled and stayed in orbit, dead, and soon you'll buy it too, unable to move, choking. Or it's a crash orbit, and you'll buy it that way, if you don't roast on the way down. Then the ship's braking program hit us, and I stopped shaking. 8 Gs, I would say, maybe 10. When a female pilot handles a ship, there is nothing comfortable about it. You're going to have bruises every place you're strapped. Yes, I know they make better pilots than men do. Their reactions are faster and they can tolerate more Gs. They can get in faster, get out faster, and thereby improve everybody's chances, yours as well as theirs. But that still doesn't make it fun to be slammed against your spine at 10 times your proper weight. But I must admit that Captain Deladrier knows her trade. There was no fiddling around once the Roger Young stopped braking. At once I heard her snap, "Centerline tube, fire!" And there were 2 recoil bumps as Jelly and his acting platoon sergeant unloaded, and, immediately, "Port and starboard tubes, automatic fire!" and the rest of us started to unload. Boomp, and your capsule jerks ahead 1 place. Boomp, and it jerks again, precisely like cartridges feeding into the chamber of an old-style automatic weapon. Well, that's just what we were. Only the barrels of the gun were twin launching tubes built into a spaceship troop carrier, and each cartridge was a capsule big enough, just barely, to hold an infantryman with all field equipment. Bump. I was used to number 3 spot, out early. Now I was tail end Charlie, last out after 3 squads. It makes a tedious wait, even with a capsule being fired every second. I tried to count the bumps. Bump, 12. Bump, 13. Bump 14, with an odd sound to it, the empty one Jenkins should have been in. Bump, and clang! It's my turn as the capsule slams into the firing chamber. Then whambo! The explosion hits with a force that makes the captain's braking maneuver feel like a love tap. Then, suddenly nothing. Nothing at all. No sound, no pressure, no weight. Floating in darkness. Free fall, maybe 30 miles up, above the effective atmosphere, falling weightlessly toward the surface of a planet you've never seen. But I'm not shaking now. It's the weight beforehand that wears. Once you unload, you can't get hurt. Because if anything goes wrong, it'll happen so fast you'll buy it without noticing that you're dead, hardly. Almost at once I felt the capsule twist and sway, then steady down so that my weight was on my back. Weight that built up quickly until I was my full weight. 0.87 g, we had been told, for that planet as the capsule reached terminal velocity for the thin upper atmosphere. A pilot who is a real artist, and the captain was, will approach and brake so that you're launching. Excuse me. Gunk in my throat. A pilot who is a real artist, and the captain was, will approach and brake so that your launching speed as you shoot out of the tube places you just dead in space relative to the rotational speed of the planet at that latitude. The loaded capsules are heavy. They punch through the high, thin winds of the upper atmosphere without being blown too far out of position. But just the same, a platoon is bound to disperse on the way down, lose some of the perfect formation in which it unloads. A sloppy pilot can make this still worse, scatter a strike group over so much terrain that it can't make rendezvous for retrieval, much less carry out its mission. An infantryman can fight only if somebody else delivers him to his zone. In a way, I suppose pilots are just as essential as we are. I could tell from the gentle way my capsule entered the atmosphere that the captain had laid us down with as near zero lateral vector as you could ask for. I felt happy. Not only a tight formation when we hit and no time wasted, but also a pilot who puts you down properly is a pilot who is smart and precise on retrieval. The outer shell burned away and sloughed off, unevenly, for I tumbled. Then the rest of it went and I straightened out. The turbulence brakes of the second shell bit in and the ride got rough. And still rougher as they burned off one at a time and the second shell began to go to pieces. One of the things that helps a capsule trooper to live long enough to draw a pension is that the skins peeling off his capsule not only slow him down, they also fill the sky over the target area with so much junk that radar picks up reflections from dozens of targets for each man in the drop, any one of which could be a man or a bomb or anything. It's enough to give a ballistic computer nervous breakdowns. And does. To add to the fun, your ship lays a series of dummy eggs in the seconds immediately following your drop. Dummies that will fall faster because they don't slough. They get under you, explode, throw out window, even operate as transponders, rocket sideways, and do other things to add to the confusion of your reception committee on the ground. In the meantime, your ship is locked firmly on the directional beacon of your platoon leader, ignoring the radar noise it has created and following you in, computing your impact for future use. When the second shell was gone, the third shell automatically opened my first ribbon shoot. It didn't last long, but it wasn't expected to. One good hard jerk at several G, and it went its way, and I went mine. The second shoot lasted a bit longer, and the third shoot lasted quite a while. It began to be rather too warm inside the capsule, and I started thinking about landing. The third shell peeled off when its last shoot was gone, and now I had nothing around me but my suit armor and a plastic egg. I was still strapped inside it, unable to move. It was time to decide how and where I was going to ground. Without moving my arms, I couldn't, I thumbed the switch for a proximity reading and read it when it flashed on in the instrument reflector inside my helmet in front of my forehead. 1 mile and 8 tenths, a little closer than I liked, especially without company. The inner egg had reached steady speed, no more help to be gained by staying inside it, and its skin temperature indicated that it would not open automatically for a while yet. So I flipped a switch with my other thumb and got rid of it. The first charge cut all the straps. The second charge exploded the plastic egg away from me in 8 separate pieces. And I was outdoors, sitting on air, and could see. Better still, the 8 discarded pieces were metal-coated, except for the small bit I had taken proximity readings through, and would give back the same reflection as an armored man. Any radar viewer, alive or cybernetic, would now have a sad time sorting me out from the junk nearest me, not to mention the thousands of other bits and pieces for miles on each side, above and below me. Part of a mobile infantry's Part of a mobile infantryman's training is to let him see, from the ground and both by eye and by radar, just how confusing a drop is to the forces on the ground. Because you feel awful naked up there. It is easy to panic and either open a chute too soon and become a sitting duck. Do ducks really sit? If so, why? Or fail to open it and break your ankles. Likewise backbone and skull. So I stretched, getting the kinks out, and looked around. Then doubled up again and straightened out in a swan dive, face down, and took a good look. It was night down there, as planned, but infrared snoopers let you size up terrain quite well after you are used to them. The river that cut diagonally through the city was almost below me, and coming up fast, shining out clearly with a higher temperature than the land. I didn't care which side of it I landed on, but I didn't want to land in it. It would slow me down. I noticed a flash off to the right at about my altitude. Some unfriendly native down there had burned what was probably a piece of my egg. So I fired my first shoot at once, intending, if possible, to jerk myself right off his screen as he followed the targets down in closing range. I braced for the shock, rode it, then floated down for about 20 seconds before unloading the chute, not wishing to call attention to myself in still another way by not falling at the speed of the other stuff around me. It must have worked. I wasn't burned. About 600 feet up, I shot the second chute. Saw very quickly that I was being carried over into the river, found that I was going to pass about 100 feet up over a flat-roofed warehouse or some such by the river. Blew the chute free and came in for a good enough, if rather bouncy, landing on the roof by means of the suit's jump jets. I was scanning for Sergeant Jalal's beacon as I hit, and found that I was on the wrong side of the river. Jelly's star showed up on the compass ring inside my helmet, far south of where it should have been. I was too far north. I trotted toward the riverside of the roof, and I took a range and bearing on the squad leader next to me, found that he was over a mile out of position, called, "Ace, dress your line!" Tossed a bomb behind me as I stepped off the building and across the river. Ace answered, as I could have expected. Ace should have had my spot, but he didn't want to give up his squad. Nevertheless, he didn't fancy taking orders from me. The warehouse went up behind me, and the blast hit me while I was still over the river, instead of being shielded by the buildings on the far side, as I should have been. It darn near tumbled my gyros, and I came close to tumbling myself. I had set that bomb for 15 seconds. Or had I? I suddenly realized that I had let myself get excited, the worst thing you can do once you're on the ground. Just like a drill that was the way, just as Jelly had warned me. Take your time and do it right, even if it takes another half-second. As I hit, I took another reading on Ace, and told him again to realign his squad. He didn't answer, but he was already doing it. I let it ride. As long as Ace did his job, I could afford to swallow his surliness. For now. But back aboard ship, if Jelly kept me on as assistant section leader, we would eventually have to pick a quiet spot and find out who was boss. He was a career corporal, and I was just a term lance acting as corporal, but he was under me, and you can't afford to take any lip under those circumstances. Not permanently. But I didn't have time then to think about it. While I was jumping the river, I had spotted a juicy target, and I wanted to get it before somebody else noticed it. A lovely big group of what looked like public buildings on a hill. Temples, maybe. Or a palace. They were miles outside the area we were sweeping, but one rule of smash and run is to expend at least half your ammo outside your sweep area. That way, the enemy is kept confused as to where you actually are. That, and keep moving. Do everything fast. You're always heavily outnumbered. Surprise and speed are what saves you. I was already loading my rocket launcher when I was checking on Ace and telling him for the second time to straighten up. Jelly's voice reached me right on top of that on the all-hands circuit. "Platoon! By leapfrog! Forward!" My boss, Sergeant Johnson, echoed, "By leapfrog! Odd numbers! Advance!" That left me with nothing to worry about for 20 seconds, so I jumped up on the building nearest me, raised the launcher to my shoulder, found the target, and pulled the first trigger to let the rocket have a look at its target. Pulled the second trigger, and kissed it on its way. Jumped back to the ground. "Second section, even numbers," I called out. Waited for the count in my mind and ordered, "Advance!" And did so myself, hopping over the next row of buildings, and, while I was in the air, fanning the first row by the riverfront with a hand flamer. They seemed to be wood construction, and it looked like time to start a good fire. With luck, some of those warehouses would house oil products or even explosives. As I hit, the Y rack on my shoulders launched 2 small HE bombs, high explosive, a couple of hundred yards each way to my right and left flanks, but I never saw what they did, as just then my first rocket hit, that unmistakable, if you've ever seen one, brilliance of an atomic explosion. It was just a peewee, of course, less than 2 kilotons nominal yield, with tamper and implosion squeeze to produce results from a less than critical mass. But then who wants to be bunkmates with a cosmic catastrophe? It was enough to clean off that hilltop and make everybody in the city take shelter against fallout. Better still, any of the local yokels who happened to be outdoors and looking that way wouldn't be seeing anything else for a couple of hours. Meaning me. The flash hadn't dazzled me, nor would it dazzle any of us. Our face bowls are heavily leaded. We wear snoopers over our eyes, and we're trained to duck and take it on the armor if we do happen to be looking the wrong way. So I merely blinked hard, opened my eyes, and stared straight at a local citizen just coming out of an opening in the building ahead of me. He looked at me, I looked at him, and he started to raise something, a weapon, I suppose, as Jelly called out, "Odd numbers! Advance!" I didn't have time to fool with him. I was a good 500 yards short of where I should have been by then. I still had the hand flamer in my left hand. I toasted him and jumped over the building he had been coming out of, as I started to count. A hand flamer is primarily for incendiary work, but it is a good defensive anti-personnel weapon in tight quarters. You don't have to aim it much. Between excitement and anxiety to catch up, I jumped too high and too wide. It's always a temptation to get the most out of your jump gear, but don't do it. It leaves you hanging in the air for seconds, a big, fat target. The way to advance is to skim over each building as you come to it, barely clearing it, and taking full advantage of cover while you're down. And never stay in one place more than a second or two. Never give them time to target in on you. Be somewhere else, anywhere. Keep moving. This one I goofed. Too much for one row of buildings, too little for the row beyond it. I found myself coming down on a roof. But not a nice flat one where I might have tarried 3 seconds to launch another Pee-wee A rocket. This roof was a jungle of pipes and stanchions and assorted ironmongery. A factory maybe, or some sort of chemical works. No place to land. Worse still, half a dozen natives were up there. These geezers are humanoid, 8 or 9 feet tall, much skinnier than we are and with a higher body temperature. They don't wear any clothes, and they stand out in a set of snoopers like a neon sign. They look still funnier in daylight with your bare eyes, but I would rather fight them than the arachnids. Those bugs make me queasy. If these laddies were up there 30 seconds earlier when my rocket hit, then they couldn't see me, or anything. But I couldn't be certain and didn't want to tangle with them in any case. It wasn't that kind of raid. So I jumped again while I was still in the air, scattering a handful of 10-second fire pills to keep them busy, grounded, jumped again at once, and called out, "Second section, even numbers! Advance!" and kept right on going to close the gap, while trying to spot, every time I jumped, something worth expending a rocket on. I had 3 more of the little A rockets, and I certainly didn't intend to take any back with me. But I had had pounded into me that you must get your money's worth with atomic weapons. It was only the second time that I had been allowed to carry them. Right now I was trying to spot their waterworks. A direct hit on it could make the whole city uninhabitable, force them to evacuate it without directly killing anyone. Just the sort of nuisance we had been sent down to commit. It should, according to the map we had studied under hypnosis, be about 3 miles upstream from where I was. But I couldn't see it. My jumps didn't take me high enough, maybe. I was tempted to go higher, but I remembered what Miglaccio had said about not trying for a medal, and stuck to doctrine. I set the Y-rack launcher on automatic and let it lob a couple of little bombs every time I hit. I set fire to things more or less at random in between, and tried to find the waterworks, or some other worthwhile target. Well, there was something up there at the proper range. Waterworks or whatever, it was big. So I hopped on top of the tallest building near me, took a bead on it, and let fly. As I bounced down, I heard Jelly. "Johnny, Red, start bending in the flanks." I acknowledged and heard Red acknowledge, and switched my beacon to blinker so that Red could pick me out for certain, took a range and bearing on his blinker while I called out, "Second section, curve in and envelop. Squad leaders acknowledge." 4th and 5th squads answered, "Wilco." Ace said, "We're already doing it. Pick up your feet." Red's beacon showed the right flank to be almost ahead of me, and a good 15 miles away. Golly, Ace was right. I would have to pick up my feet or I would never close the gap in time, and me with a couple of hundred weight of ammo and sundry nastiness still on me that I just had to find time to use up. We had landed in a V formation, with Jelly at the bottom of the V and Red and myself at the ends of the 2 arms. Now we had to close it into a circle around the retrieval rendezvous, which meant that Red and I each had to cover more ground than the others and still do our full share of damage. At least the leapfrog advance was over with once we started to encircle. I could quit counting and concentrate on speed. It was getting to be less healthy to be anywhere, even moving fast. We had started with the enormous advantage of surprise, reached the ground without being hit, at least I hoped nobody had been hit coming in, and had been rampaging in among them in a fashion that let us fire at will without fear of hitting each other while they stood a big chance of hitting their own people in shooting at us. If they could find us to shoot at all. If they could find us to shoot at all. I'm no games theory expert, but I doubt if any computer could have analyzed what we were doing in time to predict where we would be next. Nevertheless, the home defenses were beginning to fight back, coordinated or not. I took a couple of near misses with explosives, close enough to rattle my teeth even in side armor, and once I was brushed by some sort of beam that made my hair stand on end and half paralyzed me for a moment, as if I had hit my funny bone, but all over. If the suit hadn't already been told to jump, I guess I wouldn't have got out of there. Things like that make you pause to wonder why you ever took up soldiering. Only I was too busy to pause for anything. Twice, jumping blind over buildings, I landed right in the middle of a group of them, jumped at once while fanning wildly around me with the hand flamer. Spurred on this way, I closed about half of my share of the gap, maybe 4 miles, in minimum time but without doing much more than casual damage. My Y-rack had gone empty 2 jumps back. Finding myself alone in sort of a courtyard, I stopped to put my reserve HE bombs into it while I took a bearing on Ace. Found that I was far enough out in front of the flank squad to think about expending my last 2 A rockets. I jumped to the top of the tallest building in the neighborhood. It was getting light enough to see. I flipped the snoopers up onto my forehead and made a fast scan with bare eyes, looking for anything behind us worth shooting at, anything at all. I had no time to be choosy. There was something on the horizon in the direction of their spaceport. Administration and control, maybe, or possibly even a starship. Almost in line, and about half as far away, was an enormous structure which I couldn't identify even that loosely. The range to the spaceport was extreme, but I let the rocket see it, said, "Go find it, baby," and twisted its tail. Slapped the last one in, sent it toward the nearer target, and jumped. That building took a direct hit just as I left it. Either a skinny had judged, correctly, that it was worth one of their buildings to try for one of us, or one of my own mates was getting mighty careless with fireworks. Either way, I didn't want to jump from that spot, even a skimmer. I decided to go through the next couple of buildings instead of over. Go through the next. I decided to go through the next couple of buildings instead of over. So I grabbed the heavy flamer off my back as I hit and flipped the snoopers down over my eyes. Tackled a wall in front of me with a knife beam at full power. A section of wall fell away, and I charged in. And backed out even faster. I didn't know what it was I had cracked open. A congregation in church, a skinny flophouse, maybe even their defense headquarters. All I knew was that it was a very big room filled with more skinnies than I wanted to see in my whole life. Probably not a church, for somebody took a shot at me as I popped back out. Just a slug that bounced off my armor, made my ears ring, and staggered me without hurting me. But it reminded me that I wasn't supposed to leave without giving them a souvenir of my visit. I grabbed the first thing on my belt and lobbed it in, and heard it start to squawk. As they keep telling you in basic, doing something constructive at once is better than figuring out the best thing to do hours later. By sheer chance, I had done the right thing. This was a special bomb, one each issued to us for this mission with instructions to use them if we found ways to make them effective. The squawking I heard as I threw it was the bomb shouting in skinny talk. Free translation. "I'm a 30-second bomb! I'm a 30-second bomb! 29, 28, 27. It was supposed to frazzle their nerves. Maybe it did. It certainly frazzled mine. Kinder to shoot a man. I didn't wait for the countdown. I jumped, while I wondered whether they would find enough doors and windows to swarm out in time. I got a bearing on Red's blinker at the top of the jump, and one on Ace as I grounded. I was falling behind again. Time to hurry. But 3 minutes later we had closed the gap. I had Red on my left flank half a mile away. He reported it to Jelly. We heard Jelly's relaxed growl to the entire platoon. "Circle is closed, but the beacon is not down yet. Move forward slowly and mill around, make a little more trouble, but mind the lad on each side of you. Don't make trouble for him. Good job so far. Don't spoil it. Platoon, by sections, muster." It looked like a good job to me, too. Much of the city was burning, and, although it was almost full light now, it was hard to tell whether bare eyes were better than snoopers. The smoke was so thick. Johnson, our section leader, sounded off. "Second section, call off." I echoed. "Squads 4, 5, and 6, call off and report." The assortment of safe circuits we had available in the new model comm unit certainly speeded things up. Jelly could talk to anybody, or to his section leaders. A section leader could call his whole section, or his non-coms, and the platoon could muster twice as fast when seconds matter. I listened to the 4th squad call off while I inventoried my remaining firepower and lobbed one bomb toward a skinny who poked his head around a corner. He left, and so did I. "Mill around," the boss man had said. The 4th squad bumbled the call off until the squad leader remembered to fill in with Jenkins' number. The 5th squad clicked off like an abacus, and I began to feel good. When the call stopped off, after number 4 in Ace's squad, I called out, "Ace, where's Dizzy?" "Shut up," he said. "Number 6, call off." 6, Smith answered. 7, 6th squad, Flores missing. Oh, sorry. 6th squad, Flores missing. Ace completed it. Squad leader out for pickup. "One man absent," I reported to Johnson. "Flores, squad 6. "Missing or dead?" "I don't know. Squad leader and assistant section leader dropping out for pickup." "Johnny, you let Ace take it." But I didn't hear him, so I didn't answer. I heard him report to Jelly, and I heard Jelly cuss. Now look, I wasn't bucking for a medal. It's the assistant section leader's business to make pickup. He's the chaser, the last man in, expendable. The squad leaders have other work to do. As you've no doubt gathered by now, the assistant section leader isn't necessary as long as the section leader is alive. Right that moment, I was feeling unusually expendable, almost expended, because I was hearing the sweetest sound in the universe, the beacon the retrieval boat would land on, sounding our recall. The beacon is a robot rocket fired ahead of the retrieval boat, just a spike that buries itself in the ground and starts broadcasting that welcome, welcome music. The retrieval boat homes in on it automatically 3 minutes later, and you had better be on hand, 'cause the bus can't wait and there won't be another one along. But you don't walk away on another cap trooper, not while there's a chance he's alive. Not in Rayshak's Roughnecks. Not in any outfit of the mobile infantry. You try to make pickup. I heard Jelly order, "Heads up, lads, close to retrieval, close." Oh, close? "Close to retrieval circle and interdict, on the bounce." And I heard the beacon's sweet voice, "To the everlasting glory of the infantry shines the name of Roger Young." And I wanted to head for it so bad I could taste it. Instead, I was headed the other way, closing on Ace's beacon and expending what I had left of bombs and fire pills and anything else that would weigh me down. "Ace, you got his beacon?" "Yes, go back, useless." "I've got you by eye now. Where is he?" "Right ahead of me, maybe quarter-mile. Scram! He's my man." I didn't answer. I simply cut left oblique to reach Ace about where he said Dizzy was. And found Ace standing over him. A couple of skinnies flamed down and more running away. I lit beside him. "Let's get him out of his armor. The boat'll be down any second." "He's too bad hurt." I looked and saw it was true. There was actually a hole in his armor and blood coming out. And I was stumped. To make a wounded pickup, you get him out of his armor. Then you simply pick him up in your arms. No trouble in a powered suit. And bounce away from there. A bare man weighs less than the ammo and stuff you've expended. "What'll we do?" "We'll carry him," Ace said grimly. "Grab a hold of the left side of his belt." He grabbed the right side. We manhandled Flores to his feet. "Lock on. Now, by the numbers, stand by to jump. 1, 2. We jumped. Not far, not well. One man alone couldn't have gotten him up off the ground. An armored suit is too heavy. But split it between two men, and it can be done. We jumped, and we jumped, and again, with Ace calling it and both of us steadying and catching Dizzy on each grounding. His gyros seemed to be out. We heard the beacon cut off as the retrieval boat landed on it. I saw it land, and it was too far away. We heard the acting platoon sergeant call out, "In succession, prepare to embark," and Jelly called out, "Belay that order." We broke at last into the open, and saw the boat standing on its tail, heard the ululation of its takeoff warning, saw the platoon still on the ground around it, and in interdiction circle, crouching behind the shield they had formed. Heard Jelly shout, "In succession, man the boat, move!" And we were still too far away. I could see them peel off from the first squad, swarm into the boat as the interdiction circle tightened. And a single figure broke out of the circle, came toward us at a speed possible only to a command suit. Jelly caught us while we were still in the air, grabbed Flores by his Y-rack and helped us lift. 3 jumps got us to the boat. Everybody else was inside, but the door was still open. We got him in and closed it while the boat pilot screamed that we had made her miss rendezvous and now we had all bought it. Jelly paid no attention to her. We laid Flores down and lay down beside him. As the blast hit us, Jelly was saying to himself, "All present, Lieutenant. 3 men hurt, but all present." I'll say this for Captain Deladrier. They don't make any better pilots. A rendezvous, boat to ship in orbit, is precisely calculated. I don't know how, but it is, and you don't change it. You can't. Only she did. She saw in her scope that the boat had failed to blast on time. She braked back, picked up speed again, and matched it and took us in, just by eye and touch, no time to compute it. If the Almighty ever needs an assistant to keep the stars on their courses, I know where he can look. Flores died on the way up. So, as a quick interlude, that first chapter is some of the best written military sci-fi ever made, and continues to be to this day. There are many imitators, but no replicators. So, credit where it's due. Heinlein can write a rip-roaring military sci-fi scene. Chapter 2. It scared me so, I hooked it off, nor stopped as I remember, nor turned about till I got home, locked up in mother's chamber. Yankee Doodle, keep it up, Yankee Doodle dandy, mind the music and the step, and with the girls be handy. I never really intended to join up, and certainly not the infantry. Why, I would rather have taken 10 lashes in the public square and have my father tell me that I was a disgrace to a proud name. Oh, I had mentioned to my father, late in my senior year in high school, that I was thinking over the idea of volunteering for federal service. I suppose every kid does when his 18th birthday heaves into sight, and mine was due the week I graduated. Of course, most of them just think about it, toy with the idea a little, and then go do something else. Go to college, get a job, or something. I suppose it would have been that way with me, if my best chum had not, with dead seriousness, planned to join up. Carl and I had done everything together in high school. Eyed the girls together, double dated together, been on the debate team together, pushed electrons together in his home lab. I wasn't much on electronic theory myself, but I'm a neat hand with a soldering gun. Carl supplied the skull sweat, and I carried out his instructions. It was fun. Anything we did together was fun. Carl's folks didn't have anything like the money that my father had, but it didn't matter between us. When my father bought me a Rolls copter for my 14th birthday, it was Carl's as much as it was mine. Contrariwise, his basement lab was mine. So when Carl told me that he was not going straight on with school, but serve a term first, it gave me to pause. He really meant it. He seemed to think that it was natural and right and obvious. So I told him I was joining up too. He gave me an odd look. Your old man won't let you. Huh? How can he stop me? And of course he couldn't, not legally. It's the first completely free choice anybody gets, and maybe his last. When a boy or a girl reaches his or her 18th birthday, he or she can volunteer and nobody has any say in the matter. You'll find out. Carl changed the subject. So I took it up with my father, tentatively, edging into it sideways. He put down his newspaper and cigar and stared at me. Son, are you out of your mind? I muttered that I didn't think so. Well, it certainly sounds like it. He sighed. Still, I should have been expecting it. It's a predictable stage in a boy's growing up. I remember when you learned to walk and you weren't a baby any longer. Frankly, you were a little hellion for quite a while. You broke one of your mother's Ming vases. On purpose, I'm quite sure. But you were too young to know that it was valuable, so all you got was having your hand spatted. I recall the day you swiped one of my cigars, and how sick it made you. Your mother and I carefully avoided noticing that you couldn't eat dinner that night, and I've never mentioned it to you until now. Boys have. Boys have to try such things and discover for themselves that men's vices are not for them. We watched when you turned the corner on adolescence and started noticing that girls were different and wonderful. He sighed again. All normal stages. And the last one, right at the end of adolescence, is when a boy decides to join up and wear a pretty uniform, or decides that he is in love such as no man ever experienced before, and that he just has to get married right away. Or both. He smiled grimly.
With me, it was both. But I got over each of them in time not to make a fool of myself and ruin my life.
But, Father, I wouldn't ruin my life. Just a term of service, not career.
Let's table that, shall we? Listen, and let me tell you what you are going to do, because you want to. In the first place, this family has stayed out of politics and cultivated its own garden for over 100 years. I see no reason for you to break that fine record. I suppose it's the influence of that fellow at your high school. What's his name? You know the one I mean.
He meant our instructor in history and moral philosophy, a veteran, naturally. Mr. Dubois.
A silly name. It suits him. Foreigner, no doubt. It ought to be against the law to use the schools as undercover recruiting stations. I think I'm going to write a pretty sharp letter about it. A taxpayer has some rights.
But, Father, he doesn't do that at all. I stopped, not knowing how to describe it. Mr. Dubois had a snotty, superior manner. He acted as if none of us was really good enough to volunteer for service. I didn't like him. If anything, he discourages it.
Humph! Don't you know how to lead a pig? Never mind. When you graduate, you are going to study business at Harvard. You know that. After that, you will go on to the Sorbonne, and you'll travel a bit along with it, meet some of your distributors, find out how business is done elsewhere. Then you'll come home and go to work. You'll start with the usual menial job, stock clerk or something, just for form's sake, but you'll be an executive before you can catch your breath, because I'm not getting any younger, and the quicker you can pick up the load, the better. As soon as you're able and willing, you'll be the boss. There! How does that strike you as a program, as compared with wasting 2 years of your life?
I didn't say anything. None of it was news to me. I'd thought about it. Father stood up and put a hand on my shoulder.
Son, don't think I don't sympathize with you. I do. But look at the real facts. If there were a war, I'd be the first to cheer you on, and to put the business on a war footing. But there isn't, and praise God there never will be again. We've outgrown wars. This planet is now peaceful and happy, and we enjoy good enough relations with other planets. So what's this so-called federal service? Parasitism, pure and simple. A functionless organ, utterly obsolete, living on the taxpayers. A decidedly expensive way for inferior people who otherwise would be unemployed to live at public expense for a term of years, and then give themselves airs for the rest of their lives. Is that what you want to do?
Carl isn't inferior.
Sorry. No, he's a fine boy, but misguided.
He frowned, and then smiled.
Son, I had intended to keep something as a surprise for you, a graduation present. But I'm going to tell you now so that you can put this nonsense out of your mind more easily. Not that I'm afraid of what you might do. I have confidence in your basic good sense, even at your tender years. But you are troubled, I know, and this will clear it away. Can you guess what it is?
No.
He grinned. A vacation trip to Mars.
I must have looked stunned.
Golly, Father, I had no idea. I meant to surprise you, and I see I did. I know how you kids feel about travel, though it beats me what anyone sees in it after the first time out. But this is a good time for you to do it. By yourself. Did I mention that? And get it out of your system, because you'll be hard pressed to get in even a week on Luna. Because you'll be hard pressed to get in even a week on Luna once you take up your responsibilities.
He picked up his paper.
No, don't thank me. Just run along and let me finish my paper. But I've got some gentlemen coming in this evening shortly. Business.
I ran along. I guess he thought that settled it. And I suppose I did too. Mars! And on my own! But I didn't tell Carl about it. I had a sneaking suspicion that he would regard it as a bribe. Well, maybe it was. Instead, I simply told him that my father and I seemed to have different ideas about it. Yeah, he answered, so does mine. But it's my life. I thought about it during the last session of our class in History and Moral Philosophy. H&MP was different from other courses in that everybody had to take it, but nobody had to pass it, and Mr. Dubois never seemed to care about whether he got through to us or not. He would just point at you with the stump of his left arm, he never bothered with names, and snap a question. Then the argument would start. But on the last day he seemed to be trying to find out what we had learned. One girl told him bluntly, "My mother says that violence never settles anything." So Mr. Dubois looked at her bleakly. "I'm sure the city fathers of Carthage would be glad to know that. Why doesn't your mother tell them so? Or why don't you?" They had tangled before. Since you couldn't flunk the course, it wasn't necessary to keep Mr. Dubois buttered up. She said shrilly, "You're making fun of me! Everybody knows that Carthage was destroyed." "You seem to be unaware of it," he said grimly. "Since you do know it, wouldn't you say that violence had settled their destinies rather thoroughly? However, I was not making fun of you personally. I was heaping scorn on an inexcusably silly idea, a practice I shall always follow. Anyone who clings to the historically untrue and thoroughly immoral doctrine that violence never settles anything, I would advise to conjure up the ghosts of Napoleon Bonaparte and the Duke of Wellington, and let them debate it. The ghost of Hitler could referee, and the jury might well be the dodo, the great auk, and the passenger pigeon. Violence, naked force, has settled more issues in history than has any other factor, and the contrary opinion is wishful thinking at its worst. Breeds that forget this basic truth have always paid for it with their lives and freedoms." He sighed. "Another year, another class, and, for me, another failure. One can lead a child to knowledge, but one cannot make him think." Suddenly he pointed his stump at me. What is the moral difference, if any, between the soldier and the civilian?" "The difference," I answered carefully, "lies in the field of civic virtue. A soldier accepts personal responsibility for the safety of the body politic of which he is a member, defending it, if need be, with his life. The civilian does not." "The exact words of the book," he said scornfully. "But do you understand it? Do you believe it?" Uh, "I don't know, sir." "Of course you don't. I doubt if any of you here would recognize civic virtue if it came up and barked in your face." He glanced at his watch. "And that is all, final all. Perhaps we shall meet again under happier circumstances. Dismissed." Graduation right after that, and 3 days later my birthday, followed in less than a week by Carl's birthday. And I still hadn't told Carl that I wasn't joining up. I'm sure he assumed that I would not, but we didn't discuss it out loud. Embarrassing. I simply arranged to meet him the day after his birthday, and we went down to the recruiting office together. On the steps of the Federal Building, we ran into Carmencita Ibanez. Sorry, there's a line break there, and it really threw me. On the steps of the Federal Building, we ran into Carmencita Ibanez, a classmate of ours, and one of the nice things about being a member of a race with two sexes. Carmen wasn't my girl. She wasn't anybody's girl. She never made 2 dates in a row with the same boy, and treated all of us with equal sweetness and rather impersonally. But I knew her pretty well, as she often came over and used our swimming pool, because it was Olympic length. Sometimes with one boy, sometimes with another. Or alone, as Mother urged her to. Mother considered her a good influence. For once, she was right. She saw us and waited, dimpling. "Hi, fellows." "Hello, Ochichiornia," I answered. "What brings you here?" "Can't you guess? Today is my birthday." "Huh? Happy returns." "So I'm joining up." "Oh." I think Carl was as surprised as I was. But Carmencita was like that. She never gossiped, and she kept her own affairs to herself. "No foolin'?" I added brilliantly. "Why should I be fooling? I'm going to be a spaceship pilot. At least I'm going to try for it." No reason why you shouldn't make it," Carl said quickly. He was right. I know now just how right he was. Carmen was small and neat, perfect health and perfect reflexes. She could make competitive diving routine look easy, and she was quick at mathematics. Me, I tapered off with a C in algebra and a B in business arithmetic. She took all the math our school offered and a tutored advanced course on the side. Sorry. But it had never occurred to me to be unable to flip a page. I'm sorry. But it had never occurred to me. Oh, come on. But it had never occurred to me to wonder why. Fact was, little Carmen was so ornamental that you just never thought about her being useful.
We, uh, I, said Carl, am here to join up too.
And me, I agreed. Both of us. No, I hadn't made any decision. My mouth was leading its own life. Oh, wonderful! And I'm going to buck for space pilot too, I added firmly. She didn't laugh. She answered very seriously. Oh, how grand! Perhaps in training we'll run into each other. I hope so.
Collision courses? Asked Carl. That's a no good way to pilot.
Don't be silly, Carl. On the ground, of course. Are you going to be a pilot too?
Me? Carl answered. I'm no truck driver. You know me. Starside R&D, if they'll have me. Electronics.
Truck driver, indeed. I hope they stick you out on Pluto and let you freeze. No, I don't. Good luck. Let's go in, shall we? The recruiting station was inside a railing in the rotunda. A fleet sergeant sat at a desk there, in dress uniform, gaudy as a circus. His chest was loaded with ribbons I couldn't read. But his right arm was off. So short that his tunic had been tailored without any sleeve at all. And, when you came up to the rail, you could see that he had no legs. It didn't seem to bother him.
Carl said, Good morning. I want to join up.
Me too, I added. He ignored us. He managed to bow while sitting down and said, Uh, good morning, young lady. What can I do for you? I want to join up too. He smiled.
Good girl. If you'll just scoot up to room 201 and ask for Major Rojas, she'll take care of you.
He looked her up and down.
Pilot?
If possible.
You look like one. Well, see Miss Rojas.
She left, with thanks to him and a see you later to us. He turned his attention to us, sized us up with total absence of the pleasure he had shown in little Carmen.
So, he said, for what? Labor battalions?
Oh, no, I said. I'm going to be a pilot. He stared at me and simply turned his eyes away.
You?
I'm interested in the Research and Development Corps, Carl said soberly, especially electronics. I understand the chances are pretty good.
They are if you can cut it, the fleet sergeant said grimly, and not if you don't have what it takes, both in preparation and ability. Look, boys, have you any idea why they have me out here in front?
I didn't understand him. Carl said,
Why?
Because the government doesn't care one bucket of swill whether you join or not. Because it has become stylish with some people, too many people, to serve a term and earn a franchise and be able to wear a ribbon on your lapel which says you're a veteran, whether you've ever seen combat or not. But if you want to serve, and I can't talk you out of it,
yes, we're mutating,
and I can't talk you out of it, then we have to take you, because that's your constitutional right. It says that everybody, male or female, shall have his born right to pay his service and assume full citizenship. But the facts are that we are getting hard pushed to find things for all the volunteers to do that aren't just glorified KP. You can't all be real military men. We don't need that many, and most of the volunteers aren't number one soldier material anyhow. Got any idea what it takes to make a soldier?
No, I admitted.
Yar! Most people think that all it takes is 2 hands and 2 feet and a stupid mind. Maybe so for cannon fodder. Possibly that was all that Julius Caesar required. But a private soldier today is a specialist so highly skilled that he would rate master in any other trade. We can't afford stupid ones. So, for those who insist on serving their term, but haven't got what we want and must have, we've had to think up a whole list of dirty, nasty, dangerous jobs that will either run 'em home with their tails between their legs and their terms uncompleted, or, at the very least, make them remember for the rest of their lives that their citizenship is valuable to them, because they've paid a high price for it. Take that young lady who was here. Wants to be a pilot. I hope she makes it. We always need good pilots, not enough of 'em. Maybe she will. But if she misses, she may wind up in Antarctica, her pretty eyes red from never seeing anything but artificial light, and her knuckles calloused from hard, dirty work.
I wanted to tell him that the least Carmencita could get was computer programmer for the Skywatch. She really was a whiz at math. But he was talking.
So they put me out here to discourage you boys. Look at this.
He shoved his chair around to make sure that we could see that he was legless.
Let's assume that you don't wind up digging tunnels on Luna or playing human guinea pigs for new diseases through sheer lack of talent. Suppose we do make a fighting man out of you. Take a look at me. This is what you may buy, if you don't buy the whole farm and cause your folks to receive a deeply regret telegram. Which is more likely, because these days, in training or in combat, there aren't many wounded. If you buy it all, they likely throw in a coffin. I'm the rare exception. I was lucky, though maybe you wouldn't call it luck.
He paused, then added,
So why don't you boys go home, go to college, and then go be chemists or insurance brokers or whatever? A term of service isn't a kiddie camp. It's either a real military service, rough and dangerous even in peacetime, or a most unreasonable facsimile thereof. Not a vacation, not a romantic adventure. Well?
Carl said, I'm here to join up. Me too.
You realize that you aren't allowed to pick your service.
Carl said, I thought we could state our preferences.
Certainly, and that's the last choice you'll make until the end of your term. The placement officer pays attention to your choice, too. First thing he does is check whether there's any demand for left-handed glass blowers this week, that being what you think would make you happy. Having reluctantly conceded that there is a need for your choice, probably at the bottom of the Pacific, he then tests you for innate ability and preparation. About once in 20 times he is forced to admit that everything matches and you get the job, until some practical joker gives you dispatch orders to do something very different. But the other 19 times he turns you down and decides that you are just what they have been needing to field test survival equipment on Titan.
He added meditatively,
It's chilly on Titan, and it's amazing how often experimental equipment fails to work. Have to have real field tests, though. Laboratories just never get all the answers.
I can qualify for electronics, Carl said firmly, if there are jobs open in it.
So? And how about you, bub?
I hesitated, and suddenly realized that, if I didn't take a swing at it, I would wonder all my life whether I was anything but the boss's son. I'm going to chance it.
Well, you can't say I didn't try. Got your birth certificates with you? And let's see your IDs.
Listen, I realized midway through that I had an opportunity to make the guy sound like a grizzled Ahab-style pirate, and it was absolutely necessary. And if people don't like that, I'm sorry. You're going to just have to deal with it, because I don't think we ever see him after this chapter. So there. Sorry. 10 minutes later, still not sworn in, we were on the top floor being prodded and poked and fluoroscoped. I decided that the idea of a physical examination is that, if you aren't ill, then they do their darndest to make you ill. If the attempt fails, you're in. I asked one of the doctors what percentage of the victims flunked the physical. He looked startled. Why, we never fail anyone. The law doesn't permit us to. Huh? I mean, excuse me, doctor? Then what's the point of this goose flesh parade? Why, the purpose is, he answered, hauling off and hitting me in the knee with a hammer. I kicked him, but not hard, to find out what duties you are physically able to perform. But if you came in here in a wheelchair and blind in both eyes and were silly enough to insist on enrolling, they would find something silly enough to match. Counting the fuzz on a caterpillar by touch, maybe. The only way you can fail is by having the psychiatrists decide that you are not able to understand the oath. Oh. Doctor, were you already a doctor when you joined up? Or did they decide you ought to be a doctor and send you to school? Me? He seemed shocked. Youngster, do I look that silly? I'm a civilian employee. Oh, sorry, sir. No offense. But military service is for ants. Believe me, I see 'em go, I see 'em come back. When they do come back, I see what it's done to them. And for what? A purely nominal political privilege that pays not one centavo, and that most of them aren't competent to use wisely anyhow. Now, if they would let medical men run things. Oh, but never mind that. You might think I was talking treason, free speech or not. But youngster, if you've got savvy enough to count 10, you'll back out while you still can. Here, take these papers back to the recruiting sergeant, and remember what I said. I went back to the rotunda. Carl was already there. The fleet sergeant looked over my papers and said glumly,
Apparently, you both are almost insufferably healthy, except for holes in the head. One moment while I get some witnesses.
He punched a button and 2 female clerks came out, one old battle axe, one kind of cute. He pointed to our physical examination forms, our birth certificates, and our IDs, said formally,
I invite and require you, each and severally, to examine these exhibits, determine what they are, and to determine, each independently, what relation, if any, each document bears to these 2 men standing here in your presence.
They treated it as a dull routine, which I'm sure it was. Nevertheless, they scrutinized every document. They took our fingerprints again, and the cute one put a jeweler's loop in her eye and compared prints from birth to now. She did the same with signatures. I began to doubt if I was myself. The fleet sergeant added,
Do you find exhibits relating to their present competence to take oath of enrollment? If so, what?
We found, the older one said, appended to each record of physical examination, a duly certified conclusion by an authorized and delegated board of psychiatrists stating that each one of them is mentally competent to take the oath and that neither one is under the influence of alcohol, narcotics, other disabling drugs, nor of hypnosis.
Very good.
He turned to us.
Repeat after me. I, being of legal age, of my own free will.
I, we each echoed, being of legal age, of my own free will.
Without coercion, promise, or inducement of any sort, after having been duly advised and warned of the meaning and consequences of this oath. Do now enroll in the federal service of the Terran Federation for a term of not less than 2 years, and as much longer as may be required by the needs of the service.
I gulped a little over that part. I had always thought of a term as 2 years, even though I knew better, because that's the way people talk about it. Why, we were signing up for life.
I swear to uphold and defend the Constitution of the Federation against all its enemies on or off Terra, to protect and defend the constitutional liberties and privileges of all citizens and lawful residents of the Federation, its associated states and territories, to perform on or off Terra such duties of any lawful nature as may be assigned to me by lawful direct or delegated authority.
That's right.
And to obey all lawful orders of the Commander-in-Chief of the Terran Service and of all officers or delegated persons placed over me, and to require such obedience from all members of the service or other persons or non-human beings lawfully placed under my orders, and
Excuse me.
And on being dishonorably discharged at the completion of my full term of actis. Sorry. And on being honorably discharged at the completion of my full term of active service, or upon being placed on inactive retired status after having completed such full term, to carry out all duties and obligations and to enjoy all privileges of Federation citizenship, including but not limited to the duty, obligation, and privilege of exercising sovereign franchise for the rest of my natural life until stripped of honour by verdict, finally sustained of court of my sovereign peers.
Whew! That's in the book, by the way. Whew. Mr. Dubois had analyzed the service oath for us in history and moral philosophy, and had made us study it phrase by phrase. But you don't really feel the size of the thing until it comes rolling over you, all in one ungainly piece, as heavy and unstoppable as Juggernaut's carriage. At least it made me realize I was no longer a civilian, with my shirt tail out and nothing on my mind. I didn't know yet what I was, but I knew what I wasn't. So help me God! We both ended, and Carl crossed himself, and so did the cute one. After that, there were more signatures and fingerprints, all 5 of us, and flat color graphs of Carl and me were snapped then, and there were snapped then and there, and embossed onto our. Okay, let's try this entire sentence from the top. After that, there were more signatures and fingerprints, all 5 of us, and flat color graphs of Carl and me were snapped then and there and embossed into our papers. The fleet sergeant finally looked up.
Why, it's way past the break for lunch. Time for chow, lads.
I swallowed hard. Sergeant,
Speak up.
could I flash my folks from here? Tell them how it came out?
We can do better than that.
Sir?
You go on 48 hours leave now.
He grinned coldly.
Do you know what happens if you don't come back?
Court-martial?
Not a thing. Not a blessed thing. Except that your papers get marked term not completed satisfactorily, and you never, never, never get a second chance. This is our cooling off period, during which we shake out the overgrown babies who didn't really mean it and should never have taken the oath. It saves the government money, and it saves a power of grief for such kids and their parents. The neighbors needn't guess. You don't even have to tell your parents.
He shoved his chair away from his desk.
So I'll see you at noonday after tomorrow, if I see you. Fetch your personal effects.
It was a crumbly leave. Father stormed at me, then quit speaking to me. Mother took to her bed. When I finally left, an hour earlier than I had to, nobody saw me off but the morning cook and the houseboys. I stopped in front of the recruiting sergeant's desk, thought about saluting, and decided I didn't know how. He looked up.
Oh, here are your papers. Take them up to room 201. They'll start you through the mill. Knock and walk in.
2 days later, I knew I was not going to be a pilot. Some of the things the examiners wrote about me were insufficient intuitive grasp of spatial relationships, insufficient mathematical talent, deficient mathematical preparation, reaction time adequate, eyesight good. I'm glad they put in those last 2. I was beginning to feel that counting on my fingers was my speed. The placement officer let me list my lesser preferences, in order, and I caught 4 more days of the wildest aptitude tests I've ever heard of. I mean to say, what do they find out when a stenographer jumps on her chair and screams, "Snakes!" There was no snake, just a harmless piece of plastic hose. The written and oral tests were mostly just as silly, but they seemed happy with them, so I took them. The thing I did most carefully was to list my preferences. Naturally, I listed all of the Space Navy jobs, other than pilot, at the top. Whether I went as power room technician or as cook, I knew that I preferred any Navy job to any Army job. I wanted to travel. Next, I listed intelligence. A spy gets around too, and I figured that it couldn't possibly be dull. I was wrong, but never mind. After that came a long list: psychological warfare, chemical warfare, biological warfare, combat ecology. I didn't know what it was, but it sounded interesting. Logistics core, a simple mistake. I had studied logic for the debate team, and logistics turned out to have two entirely separate. Oh, god damn it! Logistics core, a simple mistake. I had studied logic for the debate team, and logistics turns out to have two entirely separate meanings, and a dozen others. Clear at the bottom, with some hesitation, I put K9 Corps and infantry. I didn't bother to list the various non-combatant auxiliary corps because, if I wasn't picked for combat corps, I didn't care whether they used me as an experimental animal or sent me as a laborer in the tyrannizing of Venus. Either one was a booby prize. Mr. Weiss, the placement officer, sent me a week after I was sent for. Okay, I see how it's going to be. Oh, I see all right. I see how it is. Mr. Weiss, a placement officer, sent for me. We'll get there. I promise we'll get through this sentence. It's not long. There's 4 more words left. Mr. Weiss, the placement officer, sent for me a week after I was sworn in. He was actually a retired psychological warfare major on active duty for procurement, but he wore mufti and insisted on being called just Mr., and you could relax and take it easy with him. He had my list of preferences and the reports on all my tests, and I saw that he was holding my high school transcript, which pleased me, for I had done all right in school. I had stood high enough without standing so high as to be marked as a greasy grind, having never flunked any courses and dropped only one, and I had been rather a big man around school otherwise. Swimming team, debate team, track squad, class treasurer, silver medal in the annual literary contest, chairman of the homecoming committee, stuff like that. A well-rounded record, and it's all down in the transcript. He looked up as I came in, said, "Sit down, Johnny," and looked back at the transcript, then put it down. "You like dogs?" "Huh? Yes, sir." "How well do you like them? Did your dog sleep on your bed? By the way, where is your dog now?" "Why, I don't happen to have a dog just at present, but when I did, well, no, he didn't sleep on my bed. You see, Mother didn't allow dogs in the house." But didn't you sneak him in?" Uh, I thought of trying to explain Mother's not angry but terribly hurt routine when you tried to buck her on something that she had made her mind up about. But I gave up. No, sir.
Have you ever seen a Neo dog?"
Once, sir. They exhibited one at the MacArthur Theatre 2 years ago. The SPCA made trouble for them.
"Let me tell you how it is with a K9 team. A Neo dog is not just a dog that talks."
I couldn't understand that Neo at the MacArthur. Do they really talk?
"They talk. You simply have to train your ear to their accent. Their mouths can't shape B, M, P, or V, and you have to get used to their equivalents. Something like the handicap of a split palate, but with different letters. No matter, their speech is as clear as any human speech. But a Neo dog is not a talking dog. He is not a dog at all. He is an artificially mutated symbiote derived from dog stock. A Neo, a trained Caleb, is about 6 times as bright as a dog, say about as intelligent as a human moron, except that the comparison is not fair to the Neo. A moron is defective, whereas a Neo is a stable genius in his own line of work."
Mr. Weiss scowled.
"Provided, that is, that he has his symbiote. That's the rub. You're too young ever to have been married, but you've seen marriage, your own parents at least. Can you imagine being married to a Caleb?"
Huh? No, I can't.
"The emotional relationship between the dog man and the man dog in the K9 team is a great deal closer and much more important than is the emotional relationship in most marriages. If the master is killed, we kill the Neo dog at once. It is all that we can do for the poor thing. A mercy killing." If the Neo-Dog is killed, well, we can't kill the man even though it would be the simplest solution. Instead, we restrain him and hospitalize him and slowly put him back together.
He picked up a pen, made a mark.
I don't think we can risk assigning a boy to K9 who didn't outwit his mother to have his dog sleep with him, so let's consider something else.
It was not until then that I realized that I must have already flunked every choice on my list above K9 Corps, and now I had just flunked it, too. Major Weiss said meditatively, with no expression, and as if he were always Major Weiss said meditatively, with no expression, and as if he were talking about someone else, long dead and far away,
I was once half of a K9 team. When my Caleb became a casualty, they kept me under sedation for 6 weeks, then rehabilitated me for other work. Johnny, these courses you've taken, why didn't you study something useful?
Sir?
Too late now. Forget it. Your instructor in history and moral philosophy seems to think well of you.
He does? I was surprised. What did he say?
Weiss smiled. He says that you are not stupid, merely ignorant and prejudiced by your environment. From him, that is high praise. I know him.
It didn't sound like praise to me. That stuck-up, stiff-necked old... And, Weiss went on,
a boy who gets a C- in appreciation of television can't be all bad. I think we'll accept Mr. Dubois' recommendation. How would you like to be an infantryman?
uh... Sorry. That bit just kills me. Well, somebody who gets a C- in appreciation of television can't be all bad. How'd you like to be an infantryman? How do you like the taste of crayons?
It's delicious.
That crayon joke has been done to death. I shouldn't. I came out of the Federal Building feeling subdued, yet not really unhappy. At least I was a soldier. I had papers in my pocket to prove it. I hadn't been classed as too dumb and useless for anything but make work. I hadn't been classed as too dumb and useless for anything but make work. It was a few minutes after the end of the working day, and the building was empty, save for a skeleton night staff and a few stragglers. I ran into a man in the rotunda who was just leaving. His face looked familiar, but I couldn't place him. But he caught my eye and recognized me.
Evening, he said briskly. You haven't shipped out yet?
And then I recognized him, the fleet sergeant who had sworn us in. I guess my chin dropped. This man was in civilian clothes, was walking around on 2 legs, and had 2 arms. Good evening, Sergeant, I mumbled. He understood my expression perfectly, glanced down at himself, and smiled easily.
Relax, lad. I don't have to put on my horror show after working hours. And I don't. You haven't been placed yet?
I just got my orders.
For what?
Mobile infantry. His face broke in a big grin of delight, and he shoved out his hand.
My outfit! Shake, son. We'll make a man of you, or kill you trying. Maybe both.
It's a good choice, I said doubtfully.
A good choice? Son, it's the only choice. The mobile infantry is the army. All the others are either button pushers or professors, along merely to hand us the saw. We do the work.
He shook hands and added,
Drop me a card. Fleet Sergeant Ho, Federal Building. That'll reach me. Good luck.
And he was off, shoulders back, heels clicking, head up. I looked at my hand. The hand he had offered me was the one that wasn't there, his right hand. Yet it had felt like flesh, and had shaken mine firmly. I had read about these powered prosthetics, but it is startling when you first run across them. I went back to the hotel where recruits were temporarily billeted during placement. We didn't even have uniforms yet, just plain coveralls we wore during the day and our own clothes after hours. I went to my room and started packing, as I was shipping out early in the morning. Packing to send stuff home, I mean. Weiss had cautioned me not to take along anything but family photographs and possibly a musical instrument if I played one, which I didn't. Carl had shipped out 3 days earlier, having gotten the R&D assignment he wanted. I was just as glad, as he would have been too confounded understanding about the billet I had drawn. Little Carmen had shipped out too, with the rank of cadet midshipman, probationary. But she was going to be a pilot all right, if she could cut it. And I suspected that she could. My temporary roomie came in while I was packing. "Got your orders?" he asked. "Yep." "What?" "Mobile infantry." "The infantry? Oh, you poor, stupid clown. I feel sorry for you. I really do." I straightened up and said angrily, "Shut up! The mobile infantry is the best outfit in the Army. It is the Army. The rest of you jerks are just along to hand us the saw. We do the work." He laughed. "You'll find out. You want a mouthful of knuckles." And I think that's probably where I have to call it for today. Goodness knows, I want to actually showcase some of the the cover art I have. Yeah, we'll call it there for today. Because goodness knows, I've got a lot of it. So much cover art. So yeah, that is the first chunk of Starship Troopers. Probably at a later date, I will talk a bit more about the Starship Troopers expanded universe, such as it is. Um, just brief hot takes, I guess. Probably nothing more than that. Um, I do actually recommend the 1980s Starship Troopers OVA, animated OVA that was made in Japan um, way back. Um, the first half of it, roughly, well, maybe two-thirds, is pretty much spot on. It manages to sidestep a lot of the more political stuff, but it's still kind of present. One thing I find very fascinating about both the Japanese adaptation, animated adaptation, and the Verhoeven movie is they both make Johnny Rico a football star in high school, and he definitely wasn't. I know me and a buddy were going through them, and we're like, where did they get this idea? where, where did they get the idea? Oh yeah, he's like he's a football star. It's like, no, he never mentions football. Track he did. Football not so much. He's he's a mediocre student. He's not like he doesn't stand out anywhere. And that's kind of what makes him believable. Um anyway, so that's our first bit. We haven't gotten to the really dry stuff yet. We've gotten through a couple of the dry bits. It's reasonably well balanced. There's a chunk in the middle that's kind of like, oh boy. Um, but otherwise, yeah. Hope people enjoy. It's a fun one. It's a romp. Don't get too worked up over the Heinleinisms if you can. It's hard, I know. Goodness knows, I know. If there's ever been an author that I have like a love-hate relationship with, it's Heinlein. Like when he's on, he's so good. He writes so well. But then it's like, and then I'm gonna interject my ideas, and it's like, oh, Heine, no. But in this case, I feel it's fairly easy to take as a um, this is what this futuristic society is like, as opposed to this is what we should be doing now. Um, it's sometimes harder to do that sometimes with some of his other stuff. People who are like, oh, he's right, he's just wrote a manifesto and called it a book. I'm like, well, have you read any of his other work? Because there's a bit of that there too. If you choose to take it seriously. I mean, if you choose to take Stranger in a Strange Land being like every single bit of that is something that he earnestly believes should happen, or I should fear no evil, then whoo boy, he would have been a pretty sick cookie, and I don't think he was quite that. Okay, I'm just hoping for the best at that point. Anyway, maybe he was. It doesn't really matter. They're either, just we're trying to enjoy a book here. That's it. That's it. We're just trying to enjoy a book. I don't want too much drama here. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to drama. It's not that bad drama-wise. Some people think it's all drama, and it's really not. It's really not. Like it's present. It's like, okay, sure, but only if you choose to think too hard about it, and I don't think you need to. Anyway, I've rambled enough. I'm going to call it. Thanks to everyone who tuned in. We'll be doing this next week for Mecha Mondays, and it's very appropriate for that because it's kind of foundational. It formalizes a lot, both about military science fiction in general, in a huge way, and also the idea of powered armor as mainstay of the armed forces, which becomes pretty relevant to the mecha genre as a whole. Um, it is not the first instance of powered armor being used. There's at the very latest, it's I think Gray Lensman. Um, there's the protagonist builds a set of powered armor for his own personal use, um, and that's like the 40s, I think, would be around when Gray Lensman came out. I think was that one of the serialized ones? I can't remember offhand. Anyway, there probably are instances before then that I can't think of off the top of my head. Perhaps Jules Verne or H.G. Wells had done something like that. Jules Verne, I would say, would be a likely candidate for having had a powered armor concept in some way, shape, or form. At any rate, that's it for today. Stay safe, stay sane, and be decent to each other. Yup. I realize that the book opens with a giant scene of people committing war crimes against civilians, but just bear with it, I guess. I'm not, again, I'm not saying any of this is okay, but it is what it is. Anyway, it's a book. It's fictional. Engage with your hobby. Don't try to talk about a hobby that you haven't engaged in. I don't know where that's coming from, other than a general sense of me having discussions with people who clearly haven't watched any of the material that they're trying to have a discussion or read any of the material they're trying to have a discussion on. And I'm just kind of like, why are we even arguing? You clearly haven't. You clearly haven't engaged with your hobby. You haven't read the book we're talking about. You haven't watched the show we're talking about. Why are we here? like anybody who's seen it will know that you haven't. So please stop. If you're not remembering well, say you don't remember well, and I'll happily. Never mind. We're off this one. Anyway, have a good one. We'll keep doing this next week. To anyone tuning in for the first time, hi. Um, I have other streams throughout the week. I stream Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays starting at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time or UTC -5. Uh, Wednesdays, right now, we're going through, I think we're almost at our last segment of A Hero Born, Legends of the Condor Heroes. Not, no, we've got like three more. Uh, we're in the second half, the last third of the book, A Hero Born, Legends of the Condor Heroes, Volume 1 by Jin Yong, for Wuxia Wednesdays, where we will do, I'll come up with some pithy one-liner for what those are, even though it's going to be kind of temporary. And then on Fridays, we've got Free Read Fridays, where I read short stories and indeed entire novels aloud. We are going through the Instantiation short story collection by Greg Egan. As kind of a palate cleanser before we get started on our next major literary endeavor, which is swapping between the Destination Void series by Frank Herbert and later Bill Ransom, and the Three Body Problem by Xujin Liu. Boy, howdy, I wish the initial Three Body Problem novel wasn't so dry. Uh, I did a reread through of it like a month or so back, and I'm still kind of like, well, this is gonna take a while. Things ramp up once you hit the second one, but the first one is kind of like, okay. Once you know the mystery, it's like, all right, fine, sure, okay. Objection, Your Honor, relevance. Sometimes it's relevant, but sometimes there are a bunch of asides in that book that really amount to nothing, unfortunately. It's kind of regrettable. Some of them do get called back on later, though, so it's okay. But it's the second and third volumes, which are, I think, why anybody remembers the series at all. Because those are wild. Those are wild. Those get out there. Those are an experience. Anyway, that's where I'm at. If you want to watch any of my stuff I've done before, it's all archived on the YouTube channel. I usually update the playlists once a month at the beginning of each month. So I will have anything I've done in the intervening weeks updated accordingly. So there. Yep. Okie dokie. Yeah, I ran out of intelligent things to say ages ago. So yeah, have fun. See you next time.